Welcome back. President Cyril Ramaphosa has been re-elected as President of South Africa. Thoko Didiza was elected Speaker and Annelie Lotriet as Deputy Speaker. This after the swearing-in of the 342 members of Parliament, as the MK party's 58 members were conspicuously absent, citing vote rigging allegations during the elections. President Ramaphosa was backed by the ANC and the DA's joint majority in Parliament, as neither party failed to win an outright majority. As such, the ANC now has a coalition agreement in principle with the Democratic Alliance to form a government of national unity. South Africa is now on a knife edge with a great deal of uncertainty over where the country is headed to. Let's now bring in law expert and Executive Secretary of the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution, Lawson Naidoo. A very good morning to you, Mr. Naidoo. Thanks for joining us. Welcome. First of all, what's your reaction to yesterday's developments?
Well, I think yesterday was a historic day for South Africa's democracy. It showed our democracy in action, the strength of our constitutional foundations, that we proceeded to hold the first sitting of the National Assembly as required by the Constitution, presided over by the Chief Justice, who swore in the members of the National Assembly that were present, who then proceeded to elect the office bearers necessary, the Speaker, the Deputy Speaker, and then finally, late last night, the President of the Republic. So, it was a day that was filled with decorum, with poignancy, and I guess with a sense of hope of what the future might bring, given the message that the electorate sent to political parties and to our elected representatives on the 29th of May.
Well, clearly President Ramaphosa won't have an easy walkover in the current administration. I mean, he may have to make significant policy concessions to political adversaries. Let's talk about what could be some of these concessions.
Well, we don't know as yet. I think what we do know is that the framework agreement, which contains a list of principles and guidelines for the coalition that's going to emerge, was made public yesterday, and I think that is deeply rooted in the Constitution itself. It commits to uphold the Constitution and to implement the framework of that Constitution to deal with issues of social inequality, economic injustice, as well as ensuring human dignity through the realization of socioeconomic rights. So I think if the parties that are going to be a part of this coalition can agree on a policy framework that adds to this, it will move the country forward. That statement that was released yesterday spoke about a potluck being held in the coming weeks to flesh out the details of those policy issues. And I think it's at that stage that we will see how the parties negotiate what their policy priorities are and what compromises might have to be made in pursuit of that. But as we stand here this morning, I think that framework agreement, provides real hope that there'll be a period of stability, that there'll be a period of focus on the, what the country requires in order to move us forward. So there's much hope in the air this morning, I would imagine.
And do you reckon President Ramaphosa was elected by general parliamentary consensus, or was it part of the agreement reached between the parties in the unity government?
Well, I think if you look at the numbers of the votes, which was in the 280s, it's clear that he had the support not just of the African National Congress and the Democratic Alliance, the IFP, but also other political parties in Parliament supported that. So I think there was, a broad support for President Ramaphosa's re-election as president, and I think Parliament is going to have to play its role as well. So if we have many parties in this coalition arrangement, then the role of opposition and holding the executive to account is really going to become an important aspect of Parliament's work. And I think this is something that the newly elected Speaker, Thoko Didiza, made reference to in her opening remarks after her election.
The Democratic Alliance and the ANC have been opponents traditionally for years, but we've seen them enter into talks and coming up with an agreement in principle, of course, to work together in just 10 days. So moving forward, do you see a robust working partnership considering the ideological clashes, between the two parties? The case in point, of course, is the foreign policy, which the DA and the ANC differ vastly when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, which both parties have publicly clashed. So do you see this partnership playing out in the public domain, especially when it comes to service delivery and in government?
Yeah, look, I think we must take what has been said in the past, particularly in the context of the election campaign, where parties were aggressively campaigning against each other. But now we're in a different paradigm. The electorate has spoken. They've asked these parties to work together. And I think the sense one gets is that there's a level of maturity amongst the leadership of many of the political parties in Parliament. And I think that was reflected in many of the speeches that were delivered by party leaders late last night, that there's a spirit of wanting to work together. Of course, there will be disagreements, as there should be. But so long as the parties and parliamentarians work together in the best interests of the country, I think they can overcome these ideological differences and focus on a policy program that is going to deal, as I say, with the many challenges that South Africans face on a daily basis.
I'm getting a sense that foreign policy will still be a grey area moving forward, as a result of this partnership between the DA and the ANC. Just paraphrasing the GNU agreement, it has opted for a pretty broad clause calling for a foreign policy, quote, based on human rights, constitutionalism, the national interest, solidarity, peaceful resolution of conflicts to achieve the African agenda of 2063. So there's no indication that they might reach a consensus when it comes to South Africa as a country taking a position on these issues, especially in the Middle East.
No, indeed, there's no detail. There's a broad guiding principles that will guide our foreign policy, for example, in the future. But I think, we must not place too high a premium on the issue of foreign policy. I think there are much more pressing issues to consider. But on the foreign policy issue, I think, the government of the Republic has taken a stance, for example, in relation to the war in Gaza by bringing the case before the International Court of Justice. And I think that's something that will continue. And I think, the other parties who may disagree with that position will have to accept that that is the position of the South African government. It's something that we will pursue, alongside other avenues of seeking a resolution of the conflict in the Middle East, including perhaps still pursuing the two-state solution in Palestine and Israel.
So constitutionally, who has the power to rein in any GNU partner who reneges from their end of the deal?
Well, it's going to be, there will be deadlock-breaking mechanisms within that framework agreement and it speaks of principles of sufficient consensus, for example, which I suppose when it's decoded means that if the two largest parties in the coalition, the ANC and the DA, agree on something, then that will go forward even if there's opposition from other smaller parties within the coalition. But if there's a disagreement, for example, between those two big parties, then there will have to be some sort of mediation or deadlock-breaking mechanism, which they will have to agree to up front, so that we don't see the levels of instability that we've seen in other spheres of government, and it doesn't necessarily bring the government down. Of course, each party to the agreement will have the right to, I guess, to walk away if they feel that the coalition arrangements are not working as they understood it to be. But we certainly hope that that's something that's not going to happen. But I think there's a level of maturity, and we must really commend the political parties that have been part of this process in producing a comprehensive, and I think what one can describe as a robust coalition agreement within such a short space of time. As a country that is relatively new to coalitions, this is a remarkable achievement which we must not underestimate. It has taken, for example, Germany after their last election. It took them almost 5 to 6 months to reach a similar kind of agreement. So, I think we can be proud as South Africans today that our political leaders are perhaps finally showing a sense of maturity, putting the interests of the country first.
Just as a final question, Mr. Naidoo, we're getting reports that there is a hint that the Democratic Alliance may be making progress in terms of, its quest to have certain services like transport and policing being brought to the provincial government. So does it not appear that the Democratic Alliance is now trying to usurp or trying to chip in some of the powers at national level?
Well, this is something that the Democratic Alliance has been lobbying for quite some time in terms of, rail and policing at a local level or a municipal level or local government level. This is going to be a debate within this coalition government as to where those powers lie, where they can be most effectively exercised. And I assume it's a debate that will continue. But it's going to be something that has to be in the national interest. It'll be obviously won't be specific to DA-controlled provinces and municipalities. It would have to be across all 9 provinces and all metros. So this is an issue of how we realign our cooperative governance arrangements to best deliver services to people. What is the level at which that is best delivered? And I would imagine that's a debate that needs to be held, so long as there's accountability for the responsibility that is allocated there.
Right. Mr. Lawson Naidoo, as always, it's always a pleasure chatting to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That was law expert and Executive Secretary of the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution, Lawson Naidoo, helping us unpack the first sitting of the 7th Parliament of South Africa.